Great.
Uh, Thank you. All right, you guys. So I want to hear all about this special. I mean, I'm so excited about it. I've followed this case since it began. So, Christopher, tell me a little bit about how you got involved, your thoughts on everything.
Sure. So I have a great relationship with NBC News Studios, who was contracted by Peacock to do this. And, they mentioned what it was. And I certainly remember the story very well from, particularly from 2005 when Natalie disappeared. But also, kind of kept pace with it later on when things happened in Peru in 2010, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And this guy, Joran van der Sloot, is a really kind of unique, certainly very chilling individual, but somebody who, as you peel away the layers of this story, you come to understand just, um, there's this sort of, I mean, you can, I think, validly call him a monster in a lot of ways, but just somebody who's in a tragic way, very fascinating. And so I was privileged to have the chance to be the one to tell the story.
And Aisha, what would you like to add?
So, I mean, I was contacted by Chris and they were looking for someone with a forensic psychiatric background to shed some light into the different traits that Euron has that, it's obviously been discussed about the possibility of psychopathy with him. So it was really just a great conversation is what it felt like, discussing the case and the details of the case about what makes Euron tick.
And what do you think it is that makes him tick? And why do you think he ended up the way he did? And from your expert point of view.
Sure, I think that's a great question, and it's something that I think, the film does a great job of discussing in detail. But, in psychiatry, there is a general rule that if you haven't evaluated someone personally, you can't diagnose them. But I think if we looked at Euron as an anonymous person that committed all these different acts that we know about, it's very easy to say that his actions, behaviors, thoughts, they match up with someone that would be labeled as a psychopath. And he has very early diagnostic indicators when he's young in terms of engaging in some animal abuse. I think there's been a story about how he pushed a homeless man off the bridge. He's abused his brother physically multiple times. So there's all these different actions where, in hindsight, of course, we can all say, wow, that's pretty clear. He's definitely, got some psychopathic traits that started early on in childhood. And then we see that manifest as he's older, as someone that externalizes blame, gets away with crimes, is a pathological liar, and has a very grandiose sense of self. He definitely believes that he is smarter and better than everyone. He uses people as pawns to further his own agenda.
And what do you think makes a person the way they are like this? I mean, we have people like us that would never think in a million years to do something like that. And this is for both of you, by the way. But what makes someone like him completely go off the rails, so to speak?
Chris, your thing is muted.
Sorry about that. I wrestled with this question early on and going through the research and kind of putting together the approach to the story. Was he a natural born psychopath, such as there is one, or was he somebody whose environment and circumstances kind of led him down this road? Um, I'll let the viewer decide, but I think for me, he was somebody who, in his upbringing, found that he could lie and get away with things. And those things, as he got older, got to be, kind of bigger and badder. Um, and, did he ask Natalie out that night, after the bar with the intention of killing her? Who knows? But, I think in the aftermath, he certainly wanted to figure out a way to make it go away. And he had, based on his past experience, he knew that, he had never faced consequences before for lying. And so that was the approach he took. And we counted about a dozen different versions of the story of what happened to Natalie. And he still seems to be changing the story 18 years later. So, um, was this somebody who was just sort of a bad seed um, whose bad decisions snowballed and he just kind of lied to keep up with it? Or is he somebody that, from the very beginning had really sinister intentions? I don't know. I mean, he's an interesting study that way, and I think the viewer will have to kind of choose their own conclusion on that.
And I think from a psychiatric perspective and a psychological perspective, the way we view psychopathy is that it isn't necessarily clear cut whether it is, are you just born with it, or is it something that develops out of circumstances? It can certainly be a combination of both, and it can certainly be neither. So, and I think that's something that we as a society really grapple with, is the idea that some people are just bad. They commit bad actions. They do bad things without reason. Um, and, ultimately, that's something that is not very comforting to most people, especially sitting at home when you're thinking about, how to spot a psychopath. And there's books on it, for example, like Psychopath Next Door, and how there's people that come off as very normal, very well-adjusted individuals. And Euron was one of those people that initially really came across to people as a smooth talker, really had a way with the ladies in a certain sense, and he knew how to make himself come off as very likable.
And what would you say was the biggest challenge about making this special, other than, of course, talking to Natalie's mom and family?
Well, there are certain people that were willing to talk with us. In Peru, we had a lot of success with really, I think ours is the only documentary that has collected all of the key people in Peru around the Stephanie Flores story. So her father, the receptionist who found her body, the lead detective who interrogated Yoron, the drivers who led the getaway car. We kind of got everybody down there, thanks to a really great local fixer, producer. Aruba was a much tougher nut to crack, and understandably, because they've faced media scrutiny for this for 18 years, and it doesn't help their tourism to keep telling the story. And so, a lot of doors shut in our face down there. We did manage to get some good people. We got long time, actually, a Aruba native who has lived there his whole life, who was Beth Holloway's kind of local guide and liaison in those early days of the investigation, and was with her the night that Yoren told his first version of the story outside of his house. We got a key lawyer down there. But Aruba was difficult. And thankfully, NBC News has such an incredible archive of news coverage over the years from Aruba that wasn't necessarily an issue for us. But in terms of getting people with intimate connections to the victims, we succeeded in that, with Stephanie, as I mentioned, but also with Natalie. We interviewed her brother, who's really never sat down for a full feature-length doc before, to tell his story. We interviewed one of her very best friends, Claire, who, was obviously on the trip with her, but also was so intimately involved in the days after, on the phone with Natalie's mother, Beth, constantly, and still all these years later is struggling to come to terms with the fact that, Natalie is not only gone, but was murdered. So, I think certainly there were some aspects of the story that were tough for us to crack open the access to, but in the end, I think we got, all the points of view that we really needed to tell a complete story.
Anisha, anything you want to add?
I think the hardest part to grapple with, honestly, is how long it's really taken for us to even get any sense of what happened that night and whether it's true or not. In terms of what your is telling us, we don't know. I think Chris and I have both discussed how we have some doubts that he's really telling the full story, because this is his trump card. That's what keeps him infamous in the press and makes him relevant, is not telling the whole story and not necessarily telling all the details correctly. And, as someone that was the same age as Natalie when the fall happened, to, last year in October, I believe, getting the confession. It's just so hard to understand. Why did this take so long? Why has it taken this long? Why did there have to be a second murder in order for us to even get this guy into jail? Um, and I think that's just part of the thing that really leaves me really spiraling about this. Why are we here this long, like this later, this amount of time that it's taken? And I really feel for Beth because she has shown such resilience in terms of continuing to get justice for her daughter and get the information needed.
Yeah, and I know we've said and we've all heard the what did we say, like 18 versions of the story. Do you think we'll ever find a 100% truth?
I don't. And here's why, because I think as soon as Yoren tells the full tale, he is no longer of use to anyone. And he no longer has any leverage or, power over the media for one thing, um, or really anything left to tell. So I think he will continue to offer little pieces and breadcrumbs. I think last October was a major milestone and that it was the first time he's actually admitted that he killed her. But the circumstances that he described seem very suspect. So, I think we'll have to keep digging. And, as Natalie's brother said, he's not going to give up. He's sort of taking the torch from his mother, who, has kind of earned the right to rest after 18 years, and she's just exhausted. But her son, Matt, is determined to continue not only to try to find out what really happened to Natalie, but also to continue to put pressure on the Aruban government to bring Yoren to justice, which they still have never done.
I think it's important to keep in mind that someone like Euron really finds this to be entertainment, right? That his source of entertainment is controlling people, controlling the narrative, having the upper hand and power. For him, most likely, you've used the police and everyone that he's told different accounts and different versions of the story to as stupid. And it really enhances his own sense of self-worth and grandiosity that he is much smarter than everybody else. And the power that he derives from this is something that's not going to give up easily.
And that's what makes it so scary that we know that he did this, we know it happened, and we still don't know the truth. And what do you think was the most important thing that Natalie's family and Stephanie's family told you, whether it made it on air or not?
Um, well, I'll never forget something that Stephanie's father told me, which was um, he felt partially responsible because he had given his daughter everything. He was, he's a fairly wealthy man, prominent figure in Peru. And he said, I never taught her that there's evil in the world. I always tried to show her the good side of the world. And he regrets that. He feels he didn't prepare her for people like Yoren. And so I think on some level, hopefully this film can serve in that way, to remind the world and remind, particularly girls who grew up um, after Natalie disappeared, who maybe don't know the story, that, evil does exist out there in this form, and, that, we need to be careful. Everybody kind of needs to be on their guard, particularly in these situations that Natalie and Stephanie found themselves in.
Aisha, was there anything you wanted to add?
I think, with this story, definitely when we think about evil, we don't necessarily picture someone like Euron. He's, you know, he looks like someone that you would just see on the street, never take notice of. And I think it's important with how this film and documentary discusses what he is capable of that we never could fathom, that the devil isn't always clear. And you can try to teach people about what to look out for, what to see. But this really highlights how important it is not to just trust appearances and how someone necessarily portrays themselves as an indicator of how they truly are. they're truly capable of.
So sad. And what's one thing about either case that you learned about from making this documentary that you didn't know before? Either one of you can start.
Well, for me, it's the connection between the case. Well, there's two things. One is that the Stephanie murder happened on the 5th anniversary of Natalie's disappearance, which I didn't realize when I started
I
this.
didn't know that either.
Yeah, just wild. And Joran ends up trying to use that as, kind of part of the excuse and the motivation as to why he killed Stephanie. He said that he was being heckled online, essentially, or threatened online for his part in Natalie's disappearance, and it kind of threw him over the edge. The other thing, though, that's just fascinating and chilling is the connection between the cases, and that the reason that Joran actually was extradited last year to the United States was to face charges of extorting Natalie's mother for basically asking her for $250,000 in exchange for telling her where Natalie was and where her body was. So she did send him a 10% deposit, and that was essentially because she knew then that she could get him on extortion. Um, he took that $25,000, and just 2 days later, he left Aruba and he went to Peru. And within 2 weeks, Stephanie was dead. And so, Beth Holloway, Natalie's mother, had been through hell for 5 years. And now, on top of that, on top of her own daughter's disappearance, she has, the clearly she didn't know this was going to happen, but she certainly felt a tinge of guilt that the money that she had sent him in order to set him up for extortion ended up, the result of that was that another girl lost her life. Um, and it's just so tragic on so many levels.
I think for me, what was really shocking as I looked into the case and was learning more about it was just the fact that there's been so many different versions of events and just how easy it's been for him to deliver these different stories without a care in the world, without any regrets, without any remorse for how much distress this is causing the people that are intimately involved with this case, including his own family, that he generally really has no feeling or responsibility for any.
That's so scary. And we are almost out of time, but I want to thank you both for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. I'm proud of your work. I'm proud of you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Sammy. I appreciate your interest.
Thank you so
Yep.
much.
And I hope, of course, and I hope we all get to talk again soon on maybe a happier topic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you guys.
Okay.
You.